Hi, this is Brian Kim. I'm going to share with you this case of the first time using my 2.4 millimeter diamond blade. So again, I switched from a 2.6 to a 2.4, and you've seen me using the 2.4 metal blades. One thing I noticed about the metal blades is when you cut, they cut a little bit more posterior, and I tended to get more conjunctival chemosis. And so I was glad to go back to my diamond blades, and I just wanted to share with you what I noticed with this very first time using the 2.4 diamond blade. So this patient has a really strong Bell's reflex. You can see this patient also has quite a bit of posterior capsule fibrosis. I'm having to use a cotton tip to really help the patient steady the eye and center it. I use a corneal marker to help me center and size the rhexis. This patient's really having a hard time looking down. So finally got him to look down, holding the eye, controlling it with a cotton tip, making my right side paracentesis incision, and then using the cotton tip to control the eye, and then making my left side incision. Again, I'm making it parallel to the iris plane to create a nice corneal shelf, which allows me to achieve a self-sealing incision. You can see how thick that posterior capsule fibrosis is. I'm injecting some intracameral lidocaine and then some dispersive viscoelastic. I'm going to use a cannula to help control the eye. And this is the triplanar corneal incision. I make a vertical groove. With my previous incision, as I tunneled through the cornea, I would enter in at the edge of the trapezoid. So at the pointy part of the trapezoid edge, I would dive down into the eye. But with this 2.4 millimeter blade, if I do that, the incision tends to be too long. And so that is what I realized when I didn't make that adjustment for this case. The problem now is when I do my rhexis, the incision is too deep. And so, again, the height of the incision is too much for this incision. So you can see I'm getting quite a bit of corneal stria. With my puncture style capsule rhexis technique, I'm seeing a lot of corneal distortion. And so that is one trick. I had the assistant irrigate the surface of the eye, and that helps me with that corneal distortion. Luckily, I was able to find the right side of the tear and begin my flap, and I'm going around circumferentially, grabbing and re-grabbing as I go. But again, next time, and you'll see on the successive cases, I'm not going to go so deep, and I'm going to minimize the height of my incision, because with that longer incision, it does make it a little bit more difficult for the rhexis. So this is the capsular fornix hydrodissection technique. I'm placing the cannula out to the equator contra-incisionally, getting a nice wave, decompressing, and then tilting the tip down and to the right and rotating the lens. So you can see it's more like a square incision. And I know square incisions are better as far as sealing, but again, you have to consider the limitations when it comes to your other maneuvers. And so I think just about a millimeter less height would be kind of an ideal for this 2.4 millimeter diamond blade incision. So I lift the incision with a chopper, go in with irrigation off, removing the surface epinuclear material, place the chopper around the lens toward the equator, placing the Phacoemulsification vertically subincisionally, crushing and bisecting the lens. You see I'm teasing it apart, placing the chopper around the right heminucleus, pulling it centrally, and dividing the right heminucleus. So that's the double chop and then the cross chop. Using a little bit of vacuum to lift that first quadrant up and crushing it between the chopper and the phaco tip, and then really just using high vacuum to emulsify the lens piece. This is a fairly soft and sticky lens, as you can see. So those people who are not accustomed to this technique might have trouble with these types of lenses, because when you try to use high vacuum and hold the lens, it tends to fall apart. When you make a groove and try to crack it, it tends to fall apart as well. And so just using mechanical fracturing force is really just kind of an easy, kind of a no-fuss way to be able to pull pieces up out of the bag and crushing the lens pieces. So I saw I divided that second quadrant with another cross-chop maneuver, and then the rest of that quadrant kind of rotated the lens in the process of manipulating it, and then we'll pull that remainder piece of the second quadrant up. Placing chopper around the second heminucleus, pulling it centered toward the phaco. You can see it's very sticky lens material, but by using some cracking forces and separating the lens piece, again, under irrigation only, I'm able to separate the lens pieces. So again, that's the nice thing about this technique. I'm able to perform the chop maneuvers just strictly under irrigation only. So it's very controlled, very safe maneuver. So place the chopper around the fourth quadrant, pulling it centrally toward the phaco tip, dividing the fourth quadrant in half, and then just very carefully emulsifying these soft lens materials. So again, really primarily this is under high aspiration and vacuum, carefully disassembling the lens. So the last remnants are being removed, placing the chopper deep in the bag as I remove those lens pieces. I take the chopper out, push BSS in, take the phaco tip out, and go in with the INA handpiece. So this is under Cortex mode, start subincisionally, grasping the anterior portions of the cortical materials. So I can tease the cortex from anterior to posterior, and this way it does peel off the cortex in a much more clean fashion. Once all the cortex is removed, I switch to the polish mode, and I'm polishing off and cleaning off the visible lens epithelial cells around the rhexis edge. Polishing the posterior capsule surface as well. Polishing in the subincisional posterior capsule as well. Once I'm satisfied with that, I go ahead and inject BSS through the paracentesis incision, and I pulse into the subincisional capsular fornix area. There's some fine material that's being liberated there. Not a whole lot, but there's some. So I'll have to follow that up with the sweep. So I'm injecting the cohesive viscoelastic to fill the capsular bag. And that subincisional flush, even though it doesn't get everything out, at least it loosens that lens material, and I'm able to go with the sweep and then remove that subincisional cortex. You can see there was quite a bit of subincisional cortex that really wasn't very visible. So I was able to remove all that cortical material. Yeah, wow, there's quite a bit of cortical material with that maneuver there. You could see a lot more than you would think. So I'm injecting the single piece acrylic intraocular lens into the capsular bag, making sure the leading edge is within the bag and the trailing edge is out of the bag. Quickly transition to the INA, go in, and then activate irrigation, disengage each haptic off the optic, go underneath the optic, tilting it and rotating it 90 degrees clockwise, removing all the viscoelastic from within the bag and underneath the lens. Switching to polish mode and just polishing underneath the rhexis edge, and at the same time rotating the lens so the haptics are horizontal. And then switching to visco mode, removing all the viscoelastic from the anterior chamber, and then I'll hydrate my incision. So again, with this 2.4 millimeter diamond blade, so again, when I switch from the 2.6 to the 2.4, the 2.4 millimeter metal blade, I noticed that I tended to cut a little bit more posterior, so I got a lot more conjunctival chemosis with the metal blade. With the diamond blade, it did cut more true. However, in this case, you can see with the 2.4, I have to adjust my technique by not making such a long incision. By making a longer incision, yes, it does seal better, but it does make your intraocular maneuvers more difficult, in particular during capsular rhexis. So for subsequent cases, instead of getting right to that angle and diving in and making my incision, I'll probably enter about a millimeter before that. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I thank you for your attention.